Lust, caution original text first part. Mrs. Yu was at home, not wearing her one-piece bell, and still sitting like a bell. She had gained weight. She and Jiazi met in Hong Kong 2 years ago. At that time, the couple followed Wang Jingwei out of Chongqing and stayed in Hong Kong for some time. Along with Wang Jingwei, Zheng Zhongming had been assassinated in Hanoi, so they all live in seclusion in Hong Kong. Mrs. Yi couldn't help but want to add something. There is a shortage of goods in the rear areas of the anti-Japanese war and in the occupied areas. Their Mr. Mai is an importer and exporter, a businessman who likes to make friends with officials and treats Mrs. Yu with every possible care. Mrs. Yu was very grateful. After the Pearl Harbor incident, Hong Kong fell, and Mr. Mac's business came to a halt. Jiazi also started a solo gang to supplement the family income, and brought some watches, Western medicine, perfume and stockings to Shanghai to sell. Mrs. Yi must let her live in their home. We went to Shufu yesterday. Mrs. Mai has not been there, Mrs. Yi told one of the black cloaks. Oh, Mrs. Ma hasn't been here for several days, right? Said another black cloak. Amidst the clatter of cards, Mrs. Ma only muttered, there is something going on at a relative's house. Mrs. Yi smiled and said, I can't refuse the treat if I agree to it. I'm hiding. Jiazi suspects that Mrs. Ma is jealous because since she arrived, everything has been centered on her. How dare you not honor it? It happened that Xiao Li was inviting a large table, people. I couldn't fit in a chair, so I couldn't squeeze in anymore. Mrs. Liao sat behind me. I said the note I called was beautiful. She said she is too old and still eats my tofu. When I say Mapo tofu, I want Lao tofu. Hey, we all laugh so hard. She laughed so hard that even Mapo's pockmarks turned red. Everyone laughs. Who said that? When Mr. Yi celebrated his birthday, didn't he just say that Magu was celebrating his birthday? Mrs. Ma said. Mrs. Yi was still reporting the news of the past 2 days to Mrs. Ma. Mr. Yi came in and nodded to the 3 female guests. You guys start early today. He stood behind his wife and read the cards. The entire wall at the other end of the room is hung with thick khaki baize curtains. In Shanghai during the war, because of the imported curtain materials, it was indeed a feat to use a large piece of them and have to match the flowers. The portrait was reflected on the ferns of the adult country, making him even more dwarfed, wearing a gray suit. He has a pale and delicate appearance, with slightly bald hair in the front, and a strangely long tip. His nose is long and has a bit of a mouse look, and it is said that he is also noble. Mrs. Ma, how many carats does this one have? 3 carats. The day before yesterday, Pin Fen came again, and there was a 5-carat one. The bald one was not as good as Sire, the only one, Mrs. Yi said. Mr. Yi smiled and said, your kerosene diamond is more than 10 carats, and it is not a pigeon egg. It is a diamond ink. It is also a stone. You can't play cards even if you wear it in your hand. There was indeed a ring exhibition at the card table, Jiazi thought. She is the only one who doesn't have a diamond ring. She wears this emerald ring from time to time. If she had known she would stop wearing it, it would make people laugh. Even she can't even look at her. Mrs. Yi said, if I don't buy it, I still have to listen to these words from you. As she said that, she played a 5-tube card. What should I do? Mr. Yi will do it for me twice first, and he will do it right away. Return double quotes. Mrs. Yi called the general up and said, no, how can this happen? You didn't say it earlier. It's not fun. I was just thinking about turning my hand. The black cloak who had just played a bad game groaned. Unless you find Mrs. Liao, go call Mrs. Liao. Mrs. Yi said to Jiazi again, wait until you get here before leaving. Mr. Yi will hold it for me. Jiazi looked at her watch. It's already late. I made an appointment with a broker to have coffee. I have something to do today, so I will stay with you all night, Mr. Yi said. This Wang Jiazi is the worst. Mrs. Yi likes to call her Wang Jiazi by her first and last name, like a classmate. I have to punish you this time. Treat me. How can any traveler ask for a seat? Mrs. Ma said. Mrs. Mai comes to Shanghai as a guest. Mrs. Yi said it all. I need you to protect me, said another man in black cloak. Okay, I'm going to treat you tonight, Jiazi said. Mr. Yi, take care of it for me, otherwise I won't be having dinner with you tonight. Mr. Yi, please help me, please help me. I'm missing 3 and 1 is injured. I'll hit you first, and Mrs. Ma will call to find a partner right now. I really have something to do. When he got down to business, he immediately lowered his voice and just muttered, someone else will come later. I knew Mr. Yi wouldn't have time, Mrs. Ma said. Is there something in Mrs. Ma's words? Or is she too nervous? Jiazi thought to herself. Judging from his smiling expression, Mrs. Ma's words were even a bit flattering, knowing that he wanted others to know and wish they could make fun of him. It's hard to say that no matter how deep a person is, he will sometimes get carried away. The second part. This is too dangerous. If it doesn't work out today, Mrs. Yi will know if it continues. She was still bargaining with Mrs. Yi, but he had already walked away. She tried her best to get away and returned to her bedroom. She hurriedly packed up without changing her clothes. The maid had already told her that the car was waiting at the door. She took the Yi family's car out, told the driver to drive to a cafe, got out of the car and sent him back. It was still early, and there was no one in the cafe. There were pairs of apricot red pleated silk shaded wall lamps lit. It's the agreed-upon code. This time someone answered. Hello. Fortunately, it was Kwang Yuman's voice. Even at this time, she was still a little afraid of Liang Rensheng. Although he was very sensible, always let others come forward. Hey. Second brother, she said in Cantonese. How are you at home these 2 days? Okay, everything is fine. What about you? I'm going to go shopping today, but the time is not certain. Okay, it doesn't matter. Anyway, we are waiting for you. Where are you now? On Jaffa Road. Okay, that's it then. There was a moment of silence. That's nothing. Her hands were cold, and she felt a hint of warmth and attachment to Xiang Yin. Do not have much left. Maybe I'll go right away. It's in time, no problem. Okay, see you later. She hung up and came out to call a tricycle. If I don't succeed today, I really can't live in the Yi family anymore. These ladies are watching eagerly. Maybe she should find some excuse to move out as soon as she hooks up with him. He can allocate an apartment for her to live in. The last 2 times we met were in the apartment. The 2 times were in different places. They were both British and American houses, and the owner went to a concentration camp. But that would be even harder to do. Know when he will come? It would have to come suddenly from the sky. Otherwise there would be something unexpected that had been agreed upon in advance, and it would not be possible to come. It's difficult to call him. His wife keeps a close eye on him, and she probably has her eyes and ears in several offices. No, as long as someone knows about it, bad things will happen. There are too many people who snitch to please his wife. If you don't look for him, he might not even come once. It is said that this has happened before, and the apartment is just a parting gift. There are too many temptations for him to take care of. If he loses sight of them, he will forget them. She still had to nail him. She almost had to lift her breasts and shake them in front of him. It wasn't like this 2 years ago, he whispered, as he held her and kissed her. He rested his head on her chest and didn't see a blush on her face. There is a long way to the public settlement. When the tricycle reached the Seymour intersection of Jing'an Temple Road, she asked it to stop in front of a small cafe on the corner, in case his car arrives first. Look at the roadside. There is only a charcoal car parked just past it. It is said that Chinese people do not keep time, and they reach their peak only in officialdom. If we keep waiting like this, all the stores we go shopping for will be closed. He said it himself. We have a memorable day today. You need to buy a ring. You can choose it yourself. It's late today. Otherwise I will go with you. That was the first time we met outside. A cunning old man like him would never think that a young lady like her would fall in love with a dwarf in his 40s or 50s. Not for money, but suspicious. And jewelry has always been a weakness of female ladies. And now she wanted him to go with her to a place she had chosen. Naturally, I have to delay for a while. And once I go out, I won't come back. He was afraid that the store would be closed and he would be anxious to death. but he couldn't urge him to hurry up. Like a prostitute, she took out the powder mirror, looked at it, and applied some powder. Being late is not necessarily his fault. The freshness has worn off, and she is no longer a problem if you don't succeed today. You may not get another chance in the future. If he came earlier than her, he wouldn't be following her. Can't figure out what kind of path she is on. Are the jewelry you are wearing real? She doesn't look like a dancer. And she doesn't look familiar if she's acting in movies or plays. The neon advertisements in the darkness outside the window are as intoxicating as the cool breeze after drinking. I used the classroom at the University of Hong Kong to attend classes. It was so crowded in and out of class that it took me a long time to pass. It was very inconvenient and made me feel like I was relying on someone else. The indifference of ordinary people in Hong Kong to national affairs also makes people angry. Although most of my classmates live in provincial capitals, which is very close to convenience, they also feel like students in exile. There are just a few people with whom we can talk the most. Forming a small group, Wang Jingwei and his party arrived in Hong Kong. He is the only one who can drive, so he acts as the driver. Eyeing Lingwen as Mr. Mai, Kwang Yuman was considered a cousin, and he accompanied his cousin-in-law. For the first time, the adjutant took them to pick up Mrs. Yi when she went shopping. Kwang Yuman didn't get out of the car. The car first took him and his adjutant home respectively, with the adjutant sitting in the front seat, and then drove them to Central. At the card table, he mentioned the materials for several suits that Mrs. Yi bought for him, and planned to make 2 suits first. Jiazi introduced a clothing store and was their experienced tailor. But it's the peak season now. I'm busy with the tourist business. I can delay it for a few months. That's good. When Mr. Yi is free, Mrs. Yi will call me and I'll bring him. He's a regular customer and he's embarrassed. Don't rush it. And they would walk all the way back in the drizzle, going crazy until dawn. But after everyone discussed it for a while, they all fell silent. Occasionally 1 or 2 people whispered something quietly, and sometimes laughed. It just happened to be Liang Rensheng. Of course it's him, only he had prostituted. So the play went on. It's not just this night either, but Mr. Yi didn't call for several days. She called Mrs. Yi. Mrs. Yi was listless and said she was busy these 2 days and would not go shopping. She would call her the next day. Are you suspicious? Found out that Lao Yi has her phone number? Presumably, his plan to return to Nanjing to organize the government was shelved for a time, so he disappeared from sight. Huang Lei paid a lot of debt. The family heard that he was renting a house with a dancer in Hong Kong and they cut off his financial support. They were extremely embarrassed. There was already a stalemate between her and Liang Rensheng. Everyone knew that she was remorseful. So they all avoided her and didn't even look at her when they were discussing together. I'm stupid anyway, she said to herself. Even when everyone was cheering for her to take action this time, someone already had ulterior motives. Not only did she want to avoid suspicion towards Liang Rensheng, she was also alienated from the rest of them. She always felt that they looked at her with curious eyes. After the Pearl Harbor incident, as soon as the sea route was opened, they all transferred to Shanghai. Even though it is an occupied area, there are still books to read in Shanghai. She did not go with them and had no contact with them in Shanghai. For a long time she wasn't sure if she had contracted any disease. In Shanghai, they got connected with an underground worker, a man named Wa, presumably not his real surname. Heard that they had such a valuable path. And of course he strongly encouraged them to pursue it. They had no choice but to come to her. Again. And she obliged. When I came here just now, I didn't see anyone hanging around. The Ping An Theater across the street was the most ideal. There was cover in the shadows under the pillars, and it was normal to wait for people at the theater door. However, the venue in front of the door was too empty and the distance was too far. So it was difficult to see the people in the car clearly. When she came just now, the car had its back turned to her and the driver could not be seen. They all shoot with the muzzle of the gun close to the person's body, unlike in the movies where they aim from a distance, Kwang Yuman once told her with a smile. It was probably to reassure her that Caillou would not be harmed by random gunshots. If she didn't kill him, she would be disabled. It would be better to die. When this time comes, it's another taste. If you are nervous when you go on stage, you will be fine as soon as you get up. The waiting is the hardest. Men can also smoke. It's so empty that I don't even know where I am. She picked up her coat bag, put it on her arm and walked out. The driver got out of the car and opened the door for him. Mr. Yi sat in the back. It's late, he murmured, hunched over. As an apology, she only glanced at him. After getting into the car, the driver returned to the front seat and told him Fukaisen Road. That was the apartment they went to last time. There's a shop here first, she whispered to him. A small diamond fell off my earring and I want it repaired. It's right here, otherwise I would have just walked over. I'm afraid you won't be able to find it when you come. We drove through a street early. She pursed her lips and murmured, it's so troublesome to meet you. And I can't even say a word when I live at your place. I'm going back to Hong Kong. Can I ask you to buy a better ferry ticket? Are you going back? Miss Wheat, what wheat and barley are you talking about? I'm so angry. She said she was taking revenge on her husband for playing a dancer. He told the driver to stop, got out of the car and followed her inside. She was half a head taller than him in high heels. Semi-precious stones, such as yellow quartz, red and sapphire, are all made of gem powder. She took out a pear-shaped ruby earring from her handbag, with a diamond missing from the leaf made of broken diamonds. It matches, the Indian said after looking at it. She asked how much it cost and when it was available. And Mr. Yi said, ask him if he has a better ring. He is studying in Japan and refuses to speak English. He always puts on an official air and waits for someone to translate. She paused and said, what are you doing? He smiled and said, aren't we going to buy a ring as a souvenir? Just a diamond ring. Okay, I want something better. She paused again and smiled helplessly at him. Do you have a diamond ring? She asked softly. The Indian raised his face and shouted upwards. He thought it was Indian, which startled them, and then led him upstairs. The roof of the attic is sloping, and there is no place to hang it on the siding, so it leans against the base of the wall. There was a desk in front along the ebony railing. There was a phone on the desk and a lamp was lit. There is a typewriter on a coffee table next to it, covered with an old oilcloth cover. A short, fat Indian stood up from his armchair and moved the chair to greet me. He had a big, dark face and a lion nose. You want to see the diamond ring? Sit down, sit down. He slowly walked to the corner of the room and leaned over to open an old, green-carpeted small safe. How does this look like a jewelry store? Mr. Yi didn't change his expression, but Jiazi was really a little embarrassed. Nor linger outside. His driver will become suspicious if he is sitting in the car. If you want to come in as soon as you come in, you can at most look at the display window of the leather goods store. There is a storefront a feet behind the car. She sat at the desk and couldn't help but turn around and look downstairs. She could only see the display windows. The glass shelves were empty. The windows were bright and clean. There were no neon lights installed. There were cars parked on the sidewalk outside the window. The lower edge of the body. It would be more difficult to keep track of the time. And you can't run over. The sound of running will immediately attract the driver's attention. The boyfriend was impatient to wait, so he turned his back to the window and looked around. She had vaguely thought about these things, knowing that it was none of her business, and left her alone. At this time, because I didn't know what to do next, I felt like I was sitting on a powder keg in the small building and was about to be blown away. My legs were a little weak. The clerk has already left. One of the boss's men is black and the other is white. Not like father and son. He has a white face with a green beard and a green beard, and his thick eyelids are half closed in sleep. He is not tall but very strong. He seems to be a two-purpose shop assistant and security guard. The counter is located so far back, and the display windows are empty. So I must be afraid of rushes during the day. There are iron sliding doors at night. Is there still something valuable? I'm afraid it's nothing more than gold, dollar bills, and silver. But the shopkeeper took out a black velvet board about a foot long, with one end slightly smaller, and the slits on it were filled with diamond rings. She leaned on the table to look, and Mr. Yi moved closer beside her to look. When the shopkeeper saw no reaction from the two of them and didn't take off one to look at, he returned it to the safe and said, "I still have this one. This one comes in a small dark blue velvet box and is a pink diamond the size of a pea. Doesn't it mean that pink diamonds also have a price but no market?" She was stunned and couldn't help feeling relieved. There were not many cars on the street during the war, and horns were rarely used. The warm pressure of the deep air felt like a quilt hitting my face. She couldn't bear to watch a bloodshed scene, or a spy being tortured. It was even more shocking. She was afraid of watching it when she was a child. The front row of the balcony turned around and faced away from the people downstairs. 6 carats, try it on, said the shopkeeper. His cozy little area is worth remembering. The large mirror leaning against the wall reflected her feet, stepping on the peonies. There has to be a sense of mystery. It's a pity that it's just a small prop on the stage, and it only lasts for a while, which makes people feel melancholy. How about this one? Mr. Yi asked again. What do you say? I'm an outsider. You just like it. 6 carats. I don't know if there is anything wrong with it, but I can't tell. Only in 1001 Nights does such a thing happen. Using gold is also a fantasy. It was too fast and she was a little worried. They probably didn't expect it to come out so quickly. She knows from stage experience that lines take up the most time. Would you like him to make an order? She said. I must be ready to send someone tomorrow to send a note to pick up the goods. The shopkeeper is already issuing the receipt. He also took off the ring and gave it back to him, unable to help but feel the relief after the transaction. The two of them sat side by side and leaned back. For a moment it seemed like they were the only ones together. She laughed softly and said, "Now it's all about banknotes. You don't even need a deposit. Fortunately, I don't want to. I never bring money with me when I go out." When she was doing this with them, she also knew that it was always the adjutant who paid the bill, and the privileged class never paid from their own pockets. Of course I didn't bring my adjutant with me today, in order to keep it a secret. 4th part. There is this saying in English, power is an aphrodisiac. She didn't know if it was right or not. She is most completely passive. There is another proverb, the way to a man's heart is through his stomach. It means that men are delicious and are easily attracted to women who know how to cook and enter in them. How can there be only one teapot and one teacup of? As for a woman's heart, she didn't believe that famous scholars could say such despicable things. She didn't believe that either. Unless it's a promiscuous woman or a romantic widow. Like herself, didn't she originally hate Liang Rensheng? But she only hated him even more. Of course that might be different. Liang Rensheng was used to being annoying and had no self-confidence. He always felt ashamed when he saw her and was a little afraid of her. So, is she a little in love with Lao Yi? She didn't believe it, but she couldn't say categorically that it wasn't, because she had never been in love before and didn't know how to fall in love. The 2 times I was with Lao Yi, I was always so nervous. I had to pay attention to everything, so I didn't ask myself how I felt. But she couldn't sleep without eating. She never suffered from insomnia. Only now, in this moment of tension that stretches to eternity, a light shines brightly on the small indoor balcony, reflecting the wide skylight on the doors and windows downstairs. I thought I would never expect such an adventure after middle age. Of course, it is also the magic of power. That's okay. His power is somewhat inseparable from himself. For women, gifts must be given, but giving them too early seems to look down on her. Knowing that this was the case, it would be a shame not to allow him to indulge himself. He was an expert at accompanying women shopping at pleasure venues, so he just waited on the side. always making people pay no attention to him. The smile at this moment was not ironic at all, but a little sad. His profile was facing the desk lamp. His eyes were looking down, and his eyelashes were like beige moth wings, resting on his thin cheeks. In her opinion, he had a gentle and compassionate look. This person really loves me, she suddenly thought, and there was a bang in her heart, as if something was missing. Too late. The shopkeeper handed him the receipt, and he put it on his body. "Come on," she whispered. His face was blank, but he understood immediately, jumped up and rushed out of the door. Although there was no one at the door, he needed to grab the door frame, because as soon as he stepped out, he had to grab the handrail of the stairs. The stairs were narrow and dark. She heard him running and walking down the steps, making irregular clattering sounds on the steps. Too late. She knew it was too late. The shopkeeper was stunned. He also knew that they were acting suspiciously, so he had to sit still and not turn around to look downstairs. However, probably because of the official car, she did not stop him. He just stood at the door and watched, his silhouette blocking the door. I only heard the car squeaking and screaming, as if it was standing upright. Bang! Shut the car door or shoot! Rampant and drove away. It doesn't seem like just one shot will be fired. She composed herself. No gunfire was heard. As soon as she breathed a sigh of relief, she felt as weak as if she had been seriously ill. She picked up her coat and handbag and stood up, nodding and smiling. Tomorrow. She was also as leisurely and comfortable as them. She was the only one, flustered and locked outside, being careful not to see a charcoal car coming from behind. He braked and opened the door, stretched out his hand and tracked her into the car. The driver was a tall young man, who was like a knight on a white horse that day. When he saw her waving and shouting, he made a fast turn and crossed the street. As soon as he accelerated, the little windmill began to spin around. Yuyuan Road, she said as she got into the car. Fortunately, I met this group of people less often this time in Shanghai, so I didn't mention to them that I had a relative living on Yuyuan Road. You can stay there for a few days and see the scenery. Before the tricycle reached Jing'an Temple, she heard a whistle blowing. Blocked, said the coachman. A middle-aged man in shorts was crossing the street holding a long rope in one hand and holding a whistle in his mouth. Across the street, a man wearing a bun held the other end of the rope and straightened it to block the street. Someone was ringing the bell listlessly. The road is wide, and the ringing sound like a thin iron sheet floats in the air. If it doesn't reach you, it sounds very far away. Mrs. Ma smiled and said, "Mr. Yi is back. Look at this Wang Jiazi. She's demolishing and filthy, and she's even asking for a treat. She's not back yet." Mrs. Yi said, "Wait until she treats us. If we don't eat at this time, we will be hungry." Mrs. Liao smiled and said, "Mr. Yi, your wife is very lucky. We have agreed to treat you tomorrow." Mrs. Ma smiled and said, "Mr. Yi, your wife doesn't keep her word like you do. When she won last time, she didn't promise a treat, but now she's still a blank check. Are you sorry? It's not easy for me to give you a meal. Mr. Yi, it's time to invite us." "But we can't invite you," said the other black cloak. "He just smiles." The maid poured tea. He knocked ashes into the cup and saucer and glanced at the thick baize curtains on the wall. If the entire wall is covered, how many assassins can be hidden? He was still a little frightened. Remember to ask them to take down the curtain tomorrow, but his wife would definitely refuse. Why would she let something so expensive go unused? She still really loves him and is his first close friend in his life. I never imagined that we would meet like this after middle age, otherwise he could keep her with him. Isn't there a saying that agents do not divide their families? Besides, she is just a student. There was only one Qingqing spy in their group, and his escape was the only flaw in the campaign. I probably watched half of the play at the Pinyin Theater. After the assassination attempt failed, I returned to the theater. Mr. Yi stood behind his wife and read the cards, put out his cigarette, and took a sip of tea. It was still too hot. "Go to bed early. You are too tired to relax for a while and have no sleepiness at all." I'm really tired today. I've been sitting by the phone waiting for the letter, and I didn't even have a good dinner. As soon as he was out of danger, he immediately made a phone call, cordoned off the area, and arrested them all. They were all shot before 10 o'clock in the evening. She must hate him until she dies, but no poison, no husband. If he wasn't such a man, she wouldn't love him. How can the head of intelligence work be so confused? Now I am no longer afraid of Joe finding fault if he killed them all. He would be confident. They were just students, unlike spies who could be kept to slowly extract confessions and extract information. If it continues, more people will know about it. And it will be said that patriotic college students assassinated traitors, which will have a bad impact. He is not optimistic about the situation of the war. Do you know what will happen to him? If you find a close friend, you will die without regrets. He felt that her shadow would always be with him and comfort him. Mr. Yi, treat me to a treat. The three black cloaks became more and more violent, shouting together. I clearly agreed that time. Mrs. Yi smiled and said. Mrs. Ma also agreed to the treat. I didn't mention it after a few days. Mrs. Ma smiled and said, Madam is here to save me. Mr. Yi, my wife feels sorry for you. Should Mr. Yi invite you or not? Mrs. Ma looked at him and smiled. Mr. Yi, it's time for a treat. He also received news that the gendarmerie had also heard about it, so he had to act in advance. Otherwise, he would not only be taken advantage of by others, it would be a hindrance to him to find out that he was following his wife's path. Scare her well, lest she hear Mrs. Ma say something and make trouble with him again. Mr. Yi, treat me to a treat. My wife's representative does not count. The wife belongs to the wife. We agreed to invite you tomorrow. I know Mr. Yi is a busy man. Please tell me which day you are free. After tomorrow. Any day will be fine. A treat for everyone. Please come to Lakesea Hotel for dinner. Lakesea Hotel is just for a meal. Hey, what's so good about German food? It's just a cold dish. Or Hunan food, for a change. Still plump. Mrs. Ma didn't go yesterday. I said it's Juru. I haven't been there for a long time. Isn't it Juru that Mrs. Young was treating us to that day? There was no Mrs. Liao that day. Mrs. Liao is from Hunan and we don't know how to order. I eat Sichuan food and Hunan food. They are all spicy. Tell him not to eat spicy food. How can a person who doesn't eat spicy food taste spicy food? Amidst the laughter, he quietly walked out. Text, Zhang Ailing, 1950.
Alright, this story has come to an end. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. Thank you.